Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020-21 Better Buildings webinar series. I'm Leslie Zarker with ICF, supporting the U.S. Department of Energy and the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Better Buildings Initiative. In this series, we've developed best practices of Better Buildings Challenge partners and other organizations working to improve energy efficiency in buildings. Today's webinar will look at innovative energy efficiency financing strategies in public housing, featuring 3 of our leading Better Buildings multifamily partners. Before we proceed with the agenda, I'd like to just share a few housekeeping notes with you. Your phone line is on mute. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, go ahead and type them into the GoToWebinar chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And now I'd like to introduce Josh Geyer with HUD's Office of Environment and Energy. Josh is the multifamily sector lead for the Better Buildings Challenge. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Leslie. Well, first of all, welcome to all of our attendees. Looks like we have quite a few people here, and we're really glad that you're able to join us. The background behind this session is we in the Better Buildings Challenge multifamily sector a couple of years ago did a kind of a SWOT analysis and identified a number of barriers to folks in the multifamily sector, particularly affordable housing providers, getting the financing or getting retrofits done. And one of those major barriers was financing and the availability of financing and various hurdles, whether they're regulatory or kind of market or otherwise, to there being financing available that people need and hooking people up with that financing so they can get their retrofits funded and implemented. So we also are very aware that when we say affordable housing, there's kind of 2 major universes, those being HUD assisted affordable or affordable assisted through other means, but that's privately owned. And on the one hand, and the other hand, we're talking public housing. So we did at our this summer, our Better Buildings Summit, we did a financing roundtable specifically targeted at HUD assisted affordable and looking at the kind of many complexities of those organizations getting the funding they need and looking at different solutions to that problem. This is kind of the public housing companion to that roundtable, where we're looking at what these innovators and these creative people in the public housing space are doing under a totally different but equally as challenging a set of constraints. What they're doing to get their projects up and financed and implemented. We are hoping that all of this work kind of together, as well as some other work we're doing in addition to these sessions, will help move us toward a place where we can be better at hooking our partners up with the financing they need, whether it's working with financial allies or working with to improve the tools that we already have. We really want to lower this financing hurdle so that we can unlock as much new retrofit funding as possible. So just a little more background on the initiative as a whole. The Better Buildings Challenge multifamily program is comprised of 91 partners with properties all over the country, the vast majority of which are affordable housing providers. 35 of our partners are public housing authorities, and 7 of the 10 largest PHAs in the country participate in the program. Our partners commit to improving the energy efficiency of their portfolios by 20% over 10 years, receive utility benchmarking assistance from an assigned account manager, and annually share their energy performance data. You can find out more about the Better Buildings Challenge multifamily program by visiting the website below, or which would be, I guess, do we have the website on the screen? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
We can circle back to that. Or by typing Better Buildings Challenge multifamily into your search engine. So next slide. All right, so today we'll start with some opening poll questions, and then we'll hear presentations from our 3 panelists. Each panelist will be followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. We'll end with a final poll and wrap up. And I want to add that this polling is for kind of our own edification right now, but it's also a part of this whole effort to understand what's going on better in the financing space in public housing. So we will be very interested in your responses, and we'll look at them after we're finished the session. Okay. So I believe I'm handing off to Leslie to go through these poll questions.
Sounds good. Let's take a quick minute to get familiar with Slido. We'll be using, please go to www.slido.com now on your smartphone or on your computer. If on your computer, you can open a new window on your computer's internet browser, and then just go ahead and type in, once you're at slido.com, type in today's event code, which is #DOE. And during our panelist presentations, you can submit questions anytime here in Slido's Q&A platform. We'll have about 5 minutes of Q&A after each panelist. And then also in Slido, if you see questions you would like, you can select the thumbs up icon next to that question, which will result in the most popular questions moving to the top of the queue. So I'll give everyone just a few minutes more to open up Slido, and then we'll be launching our poll shortly. Okay, next slide. So we'd like to do 2 quick polls to hear from you. Again, go to slido.com, #DOE. And the first poll question is, how would you best describe your employer? We have a number of options here to choose from: public housing authority, federal or state agency, NGO or nonprofit, maybe you're a consultant, affordable housing provider, utility company. The overwhelming majority is PHAs, which is totally appropriate and awesome. We're so glad so many of you are here today. Followed by federal and state agencies, it looks like. Followed by consultants and nonprofits. And then a few other types of affordable housing providers. So that's great. Utility companies there as well. All right, thank you so much for that. And then let's go to the second question. What types of financing has your organization used to fund energy efficiency upgrades? Please go ahead and enter 1 or more answers into the text box, and then your answer will appear in the word cloud on the screen. Cool. Well, none's big, which is exactly what we don't want to see, and we're trying to avoid with the efforts that we're going about today. Capital Fund Program for PHAs, of course, capital funds, Office of Capitalization at HUD, rebates, grants, some ESPCs, EPCs, of course. Oh, there's even a little PACE in there, which is interesting. Utility incentives, I see rebates, the Public Benefit Fund. Let's see, utility ratepayers, of course, if there's a utility program that taps into ratepayer funds. Great. Tax exempt leases and bonds and energy consultant advisors. Excellent. Thank you guys so much. It does give us a good idea of what people are relying on. Now I'll turn it back to Josh to introduce our first panelist.
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks again to our participants who really are going to find this helpful and find it helpful right now. So we're delighted to have three panelists present their work to you today: JoAnn, Sutton, Stephen Sia, and Tina Miller. Before we hear from our panelists, so Leslie already did this part. Okay. So to begin with, I'm pleased to introduce JoAnn Sutton, Executive Director of the Manhattan Housing Authority of Kansas. JoAnn has served in several leadership positions at the local, state, and national levels of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and is currently serving as treasurer for the state chapter. Welcome, JoAnn.
Oh, unmute still. Now we hear you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for having me here today. I'm delighted to be here. As Josh indicated, I'm with the Manhattan Housing Authority in Manhattan, Kansas, and we're going to be talking about the apartment towers high-rise rehab project today. Next slide. So this slide is just a little bit about our housing authority. We're a relatively small housing authority. Manhattan is about 73,000 population when the students are in session. We're in very close proximity to the Fort Riley military base. Next slide. So this is a picture of the building that we're speaking about today. This is kind of our focus and where we discovered a mold problem in 2013. We also learned through testing, of course, that there was asbestos in the building, and so we would have to deal with both mold and asbestos. Next slide, please. So in terms of funding, our first step was to apply for an emergency capital fund grant in fiscal year 2014. Although the engineer's estimates were over $7 million, there were some items that HUD did not approve in our emergency grant. They funded us at $5.4 million. HUD would not approve some items such as replacement of the windows, which were a big part of the problem. They were original to the building and leaking moisture and air. They also required that the HVAC system that we had in place, which was original to the building, an old two-pipe system, be replaced with the same type of system. We were required to use operating reserves and available capital fund monies for project-related expenses prior to being approved for the emergency grant. So we had some tenant relocation, mold testing, engineer fees, et cetera, that we needed to pay for. And of course, we were moving people out of the building, and so our reserves were going down, and so was our dwelling rental income, but our expenses seemed to be going up. Next slide. So this left us with insufficient funds to complete the project, especially since the windows were a large part of the problem and a large expense, but were not approved in the emergency grant. We also were discussing about the same time an energy performance contract. HUD did eventually agree to allow us to fund the replacement of domestic storm sewer and water lines out of the emergency grant. However, they did not increase the amount of the grant to do that. So we still had a shortage of funds to deal with. So in the energy performance contract, we kind of refocused a little bit on what our priorities were, which was to get the apartment towers building back online. We were able to use $719,000 out of the energy performance contract to cover the cost of the difference between replacing the HVAC with a two-pipe system and upgrading to a heat pump system, which would provide more resident comfort as well as more energy efficiency in the building. We also paid for lighting retrofits and water-saving devices, as well as refrigerators out of the energy performance contracts. Next slide. So despite the energy performance contract, which was a big help, we still had a shortage. The emergency grant was not enough. Some things did not qualify for the energy performance contract, and we still had a building that we needed to get back online. And so around 2013, 2014, when all of this was happening, HUD had began to transition the replacement housing factor funds to DDTF funds. And so the DDTF funds were now able to be used as capital improvements. So that kind of gave us an idea and we said, well, we've been accumulating these funds since about 2008. Why don't we ask for a waiver and see if we can use them as if they were DDTF funds? And so we did make that request and had approved the request. They also granted an extension on the obligation and expenditure of those funds because some of them were setting to expire on those dates. So that had a total impact of $480,000 on the project. But yet we were still short funds to finish the project. And so in a conversation with our field office and in speaking, we set up a conference call with the headquarters Office of Capital Improvement. And that conversation led us to a consultant who had worked with a housing authority who was in a similar position, and they were able to approach their city and receive basically an advance on their capital funds, on their future capital funds. And so the city eventually agreed after many conversations and doing tours with the city commissioners and local officials of the building and showing them exactly what the problems were. Additionally, towards what we thought was going to be the end of the construction project, we discovered that the below-grade sewer lines were deteriorated to the point that they were no longer usable, and we could not get a certificate of occupancy, obviously, if we didn't have usable sewer lines. And so we did approach the city and asked them to fund replacement of windows, which were just over $800,000. And we were able to line the deteriorated sewer lines with that $1 million that the city approved. And so they, like I said, they issued bonds to fund that advance. The housing authority will pay back over 30 years. Our annual payment is about $62,000, but it's not a loan. There's no collateral involved. Our agreement is specific that if the housing authority isn't financially able to make that payment in any given year, they will defer the payment. We will still owe the money, but they will defer that payment in any given year as necessary. So as I understand, there's one other housing authority who has done this in the country. I'm not sure where they are, but if you're interested in seeing the, it was called an advance grant, I can't even say it right now. If you're interested in seeing the agreement with the city, I'm sorry, you can log on to the Better Buildings Challenge website, and there is a copy of that agreement as a PDF document on that website, and you can look and see how you might be able to replicate that with your city. We were in discussing this, you know, we started with the city manager and the finance director and the city attorney, of course, and from there went on up to the city commission. So, and with the, I would also say, with backing up a little bit, with the replacement housing factor grant funds, although they're not in place anymore and the DDTF funds can be used for capital improvements, there may be other funds out there that your housing authority has received or can apply for, and may be able to receive some waivers. You just have to kind of think outside of the box and look into the regulations, talk with your field office folks, talk with the folks in headquarters, and they have very good information about how these funds can sometimes be used, because there may be some exceptions in there that you can use for those funds. So I think these last two things are very replicable, as well as the energy performance contract option. Next slide. So the next two slides, this slide and the next slide, just kind of show the sources of funding for what turned out to be over an $8 million project. And you can see we had funds from HUD, some from our own operating budget, the energy performance contract, and the recoverable grant agreement. That's what I was looking for, the recoverable grant agreement. Next slide. And this slide just kind of shows the uses of funds. Obviously, the the reconstruction of the building was the largest expense. It was tore down to studs. But I'm confident that if we had not used these other funding strategies, that we would have a building still sitting here vacant. We did receive our certificate of occupancy in September of 2018, so the building is up and housing residents and our offices once again. Next slide. And I'm ready for any questions and answers.
Great, thank you so much, JoAnn. So I'm going to check out our questions on Slido and see if we have any that seem relevant. So here we have one. I'll read it out. Beyond technical assistance for okay. Let's see. Leslie, have you had a chance to go through these questions yet?
No, I'm looking at.
Hi there.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess so. Some folks are looking for some additional information about the age of the building and the how the heat pumps were installed. If you can take those, JoAnn.
Okay. The building was constructed. I believe construction was completed in 1975, and so it was 40 plus years old. We did install heat pumps in each unit. We had to actually build a larger mechanical room to house some of the equipment, which we used replacement housing funds for, as well as install a cooling tower out on top of that expansion.
Oh, Josh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Leslie. We have a question about who your EPC contract was with.
Johnson Controls.
Okay. And how long it took you to get all the funding in place at the end of the day?
There were a lot of starts and stops. We applied for the emergency grant in November of 2013. It was approved in June of 2014. It did take a little bit of time to get the request submitted for the replacement housing funds, and there's always, it had to run through the channels at the head offices. So I don't know exactly, but I'd say it was an average of sometimes a couple of months waiting to get those approvals. There was one grant that there seems to be some misunderstanding between the headquarters and us in the field office and we thought that by asking for the extension on some of the grants, that meant all of them, and headquarters didn't see it that way. So we did lose one grant because it did expire. And then there's, so we had to kind of regroup at that time and figure out how we were going to make that up. I think probably the biggest gap was in working with the city to try and get the recoverable grant agreement approved. We started that process in 2017, I believe in about May, or April or May, and it was finally approved in the last quarter of 2017. And then, of course, we had to get the change orders in place and get the contractors organized to get in here and get it done. But so it turned into about a 5-year project. But like I said, there were some stops and starts in there with trying to figure out funding.
So we have a couple more. One is, what was your relocation process like, and how much did it end up costing?
Well, that's an interesting question. We actually stopped refilling apartments, obviously, as tenants moved out due to normal attrition. And as tenants moved out of some of our other public housing properties, we were turning them over and moving residents from the apartment towers into other public housing units as much as we could to save on relocation expenses so that we could have that money to reinvest into the construction. I think we relocated 47 tenants in the beginning, and only 6 of them had to be relocated at other properties, but they were relocated to properties that we managed, and they were tax credit properties. And so our largest expense was paying the utilities, since they were at the family site where they pay utilities. Our largest expense were the utilities and the actual moving costs to and from. By the time the building was finished, enough people had moved out of public housing. We had enough turnover that we only relocated 16 of the existing tenants back. Some of them chose to stay in the developments where they had been transferred to if the unit sizes were appropriate. So I think our relocation expenses were somewhere around $350,000 by the time we paid movers and utility bills.
Thank you so much, JoAnn. Now we're gonna move on to our next presenter. Switch my correct window here. Okay, so the next presenter is Stephen Sia, the Director of Development, Modernization, and Sustainability at the Jersey City Housing Authority. Quite a title. Stephen's the point person between national development companies and the Housing Authority regarding the planning and repositioning of outdated public housing. Stephen is a New Jersey attorney with over 20 years of HUD-related and public housing experience, as well as development experience. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. And thank you for affording me the opportunity to speak today. I'm always happy to talk about the Jersey City Housing Authority and the things that we've done with regard to energy efficiency. Next slide. So just a little bit about the Housing Authority. We are the second largest housing authority in New Jersey. We have approximately 7,000 affordable units, 2,400 public housing, and 4,600 Housing Choice Voucher Program voucher units. In 2008, we created what we call the Sustainability Plan, but in project management parlance, that would be the charter, and it is something that we use right through to today. We have joined the BBC in 2014, and we met our BBC goal within 6 years. Next slide. So this is a very unique housing authority in that we have no scattered sites, but we have large old sites. And as a result, we had some barriers to achieving our goals, one of which would be aging infrastructure and outdated mechanical systems. Our buildings are all between 60 and 80 years in age, and we have a few that were built in the 1800s. that we took over, one of which is a historical landmark on the National Register. So that gave us barriers that we had to deal with. There was also, we had financing and funding barriers, obviously. One of those would be cost. It's very difficult for housing authorities to borrow money because there's no one to sign personal guarantees. And then there was loss of programs. Our funds were gone. Hope 6 was gone. CNI is very limited and restricted in the way it can be used. RAD, which is the new tool, which is a good tool, and I will talk about it, but it has issues if you already have an EPC or a CFFP funding out there, which we do. And then we have regulatory barriers. Those could be funding restrictions, the procurement tedium, which I don't know about other states, but in New Jersey is very difficult. Our procurement is take HUD procurement rules and then put them on steroids, and then you have the New Jersey procurement rules. They're almost they're arduous at best. And then same thing with the RAD restrictions, because how you deal with EPC and how you deal with CFFP, there's restrictions on what you can do. There's also, we have force majeure issues. If anybody knows Jersey City, it is a low-lying coastal city, and therefore we have problems with flooding. And Superstorm Sandy bore that out. We spent an awful lot of money on our EPC program, and then a lot of that stuff got wiped out, and we had to double down in what we did in order to meet our goals. And then resident quality of life, which is one of these things that regretfully some of our housing authorities overlook. But you know, these energy initiatives, they're more than inconvenient. They affect the quality of life, and you have to determine what's the best way to deal with that, which I'll talk about. And I use, and my executive director uses to this day as a tool that we find beneficial, which we will talk about. Next slide. So there were financial opportunities that are available to PHAs and what we did and what we couldn't do or what we would like to do. And the first, of course, is the rental assistance demonstration. I do think that there are some issues with RAD, which I won't get into today, but I will tell you one of the real benefits of it is that right now, with your subsidy proration at 97%, if you RAD today, you're locking in at 97% for the next 20 years, which is a wonderful thing. However, the Jersey City Housing Authority, like a lot of other housing authorities, we had a robust EPC program, and we had a limited CFFP program, which is the Capital Fund Finance Program. And those things don't necessarily work well with RAD, because what RAD does away with is how you pay for those things. So there's all kinds of rules, and what are you going to do if you have an EPC? What are you going to do if you have CFFP? And you have to decide whether or not it's beneficial to RAD. Capital Fund Financing Program, which is something we used, and I will talk about. I will tell you that we used it here, not just this administration, but the prior administration, in ways that were better than other housing authorities, in that we used it very limited. We did not go over the 33%. We're not locked in. If we do RAD, we can pay some of that money back. We also, based on our numbers and the ratio, I figured that we probably can, I mean, we have the 5% restriction, but if we were entitled to a waiver, we're probably the housing authority that might be able to get one, only because we're only about 10% of our total capital fund budget, which is a good thing. There's also federal emergency management money. After Sandy, we tapped into FEMA. FEMA gave us a $250,000 grant, which we used exclusively for cleanup and energy initiatives, which was very beneficial and was a help to receive the money. And as we know now with Corona, FEMA is also again giving us, the possibility of getting money. And if you're creative enough, you can use that, and some of those things can be for energy efficiency. And then coronavirus aid relief and the CARES Act. It is a capital fund money, but it's used basically like operating funds, and there's a lot less restrictions on that money. And we are using that for the benefit of a lot of things, not only to prevent the spread of the virus, but some of that also equates to better energy performance. So those are some of the things that there are opportunities in the feds right now. There's state funding opportunities always with tax credits, which I'll talk about. But after Sandy, the New Jersey HMFA actually came out with the Sandy CDBG program. We had in our EPC, we spent about $2 million on new efficient boilers. Sandy came in and wiped the boilers out, all brand new boilers. They were less than a month old. We doubled down. We went to the HMFA. They actually gave us a loan, or they call it a loan, for $8 million to go back and buy those boilers. The interesting thing about the that loan is that it has a 20% debt forgiveness per year. So after 5 years, we don't owe anything and we haven't paid anything back. So to me, it operates like a grant. There's also city and local funding that we utilize all the time. Jersey City has a robust affordable housing trust fund. It is a loan, but it's at 0% with a payoff in 30 years. No monthly payments required. It's just that you have to pay it back. But at 0% interest, it is a very good tool that we use and we use all the time. And then we have local nonprofit organizations that also tap into CDBG money, and through partnerships that our executive director has cultivated, they have provided us with a new boiler system we're about to install. They've provided us with an insulation program, and they also had a program for appliances where the residents would trade in their old appliances and they'd get more efficient appliances, all of which has been very helpful in us reaching our Better Buildings Challenge goals. And of course, you have your energy partnerships. We have a very good EPC program with Siemens. One of the things we never talk about with EPC is, of course, there's the money and the ability for them to go out and get you the financing. And we all know how the EPC works. But more than that, we tap into their expertise. So the group at Siemens that deals with us have been wonderful. I can call them on unrelated energy matters, and they're happy to talk to me. So, and happy to talk to my architect and my engineer. So that was that is a partnership that not only was financially suitable for us, but also is a plethora of knowledge with regards to energy performance. And then there's low-income housing tax credit partnerships. But again, you know, if you're going to do that for RAD, because we know RAD is cost neutral, but if you're going to borrow money, you're probably going to use tax credits, which means that you're going to get involved with an owner entity that can take the property so that they can you take advantage of the tax credits, because we don't pay taxes. But now, which has recently come out, and this is not a pitch, but I know that a lot of you, like us, are part of the HAY group, Housing Authority Insurance Group, which is a collective across the country. And they put out a program about 2 years ago, which I was talking about, and people are looking at me like I'm crazy, but now they're really pitching it, where they actually come in and guarantee, they give you the personal guarantee, which is a wonderful opportunity so that you're not stuck with the developer telling you, well, if, you know, it's our way or the highway. You have this other opportunity to go out and get money and borrow it with the personal guarantee that's backed by an insurance carrier. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about project charters, and our approach here is we use a project management design development approach to everything we do, whether it be construction, whether it be operations, but in development, we really use it. In fact, we have sent everybody in the executive staff and parts of different groups to get their project management knowledge degrees. So we are a group that understands project management pretty well, and it's been very helpful. So one of the things we do is anytime we talk about energy efficiency, we do a SWOT analysis. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? And what are our threats? And generally, basically, we know when it comes to development in Jersey City, the strength is always that we have a cap rate between 3% and 4%, which is basically unheard of. It gives me the opportunity to bargain with developers. It's a bargaining chip. If they're putting market rate units in our sites, which they do, the rents they receive are unbelievable. So it gives us a better leg up on the kind of deal that we set with the developer. How does that help us? Well, if I have a higher percentage of development fees and I have a higher percentage of cash flow, that's just more ability for me to give the money to whether it be development or social programs that support the housing authority or energy efficiency. We kind of spread it across.
Hey, Stephen, you have about like 1 more minute, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry. So one of the interesting things, and you can just see the slides, but I'm showing you the site there, which is Berry Gardens. This is an example that not all energy conservation measures are financially prudent or feasible. The windows that had to be replaced there, those are curtain walls. So to replace the windows in the one building with the blue facade is about $3 million. So how do I go about doing that? We look for grant money. We do use some capital funds, and we go to HUD to determine if there's something that we can do. Next slide. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick now. So we have an EPC with Siemens, which I talked about, 15 years, $8.5 million. We doubled down on the EPC by refinancing the loan with Capital One, which has been very successful. It saves us an additional $75,000 a year, which is something that people don't realize they can do. I talked about Sandy CDBG. We received a $500,000 clean energy grant from the DCA in New Jersey. We use affordable housing trust funds, and we use CFFP, and we use ARA funds, which you can see, which is the that slide is actually from Siemens. We did a solar panel system with glycol heating of the water at one of our sites, which has really saved us a lot of money. And I talked about the local nonprofits. Next slide. So one of the things that just want to reiterate here is replicable strategies and next steps. So it's an iterative process. We started this in 2008. It is a totally new administration, but we've adopted that, which is, it makes it very easy for us to go and get money. We have a strategic planning process, which also creates, when you present a strategic plan under project management, you're not just asking for money, but you're convincing investors to put their money in your site. And we've been very successful. We do funding source analysis and research all the time, what's available and how they interrelate with money that we already have out. And we identify and establish partnerships constantly, whether it be with different groups, nonprofits, government entities, schools, universities. It all helps. Next slide. So in summary, each JCHA department has a technical advisor approaches energy from a different perspective. Engineers are concerned with saving on energy conservation, but accountants also talk about money, and operations always want to know how you're going to do it. I put all of those groups in the same room so that we are a cohesive unit with a systematic approach, and it has led to a great success. Next slide. That's it.
Great, thank you so much, Stephen. So we're gonna, to keep us on track, I'm gonna just pitch you to 2 questions here to take quickly, and then we'll move on to our last presenter. So here's one that says, what are some creative, quote unquote, ways that New Jersey uses the CARES Act to help fund energy efficiency initiative?
Sure. So one of the things that we are in the process of doing is we have a lobby where both our Section 8 and our Section 9 residents converge for whatever we do. We have broken up that lobby so that the Section 8 residents go through one side and the Section 9 residents go through other, for no other reason other than CARES Act gives us the ability to separate. You know, the more separation there is, the better. Part of that has to do with, you know, adding heating sources and adding boilers or whatever, because we're separating that stuff out. When we do that kind of stuff, we always go for more efficient than what's already there. That's one of the things. There's others which I would love to talk about. We can, you know, whoever's pitching the question, you know, if you want to call me, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, so and you can, after we wrap this up, Stephen, you can get in the Slido if you want and respond that way. The other question is, why didn't the insurance cover the boilers as a result of Sandy?
They did and they didn't. So they gave us a certain amount of money. It was not enough money, and they were not going to pay for us to take. What happened was the boilers were in the basement, so we had to take units offline and we had to do some retrofits. The insurance company was not going to cover that kind of stuff. So that's why we took the opportunity. We went out and got the $8 million and we put in a system. We joke about it. We have a system that the Freedom Tower has. I mean, it's amazing, and it is very, very efficient.
All right, they're great. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, you can find Stephen's contact information on the screen. So we will move on for our final presenter. Our final presenter is Tina Miller. Tina has led Cambridge Housing Authority's energy program for the past 15 years. Her work has been instrumental in leveraging grant funds, utility incentives, and energy finance in support of CHA's transformative portfolio-wide energy program. Tina has experience with substantial building retrofits, on-site energy installations, and energy supply contracting, as well as energy reporting. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today and to walk you through a snapshot of where Cambridge Housing Authority and our position relative to energy savings. Can I have the next slide, please? So at CHA, we're an urban area, Cambridge, Massachusetts, abutting Boston. We house about 7,000 families, or 12,000, or 12% of the population of the city. Our portfolio is split between low-rise family developments, and we have 5 elder disabled high-rises, and we also have scattered units and condo settings across the city. Next slide, please. So Cambridge entered into the Better Buildings Challenge in 2014. We became a goal achiever in 2019 by reducing our energy intensity by 23% within 4 years, and our greenhouse gas emissions by 25% within that same framework. This is a result of our base as one of the original moving to work agencies, which helped us with our locking our utilities over time to be able to do both self-ESCOs and third-party ESCOs. They're part of our track record of successful energy savings over time. We did with Ameresco in the late 90s, one of the first conversions from an electric resistant, all electrically heated building to gas hydronic heat. And at that time, that wasn't even an energy by BTU savings. I'm sorry, that was an energy savings rather than a cost savings. But Ameresco was willing to work with us and really provided our training wheels for the work that we did over the intervening years. We also had 3 successful competitive ARA projects where we continued to gain steam, as it were, in approaching our approach to buildings. Most recently, we've had an infusion of capital due to our transition from public housing to the Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD program. Next slide, please. Under RAD, we've used Section 18 or Demo Dispo to convert the majority of our buildings to Section 8 housing. One of the first steps of that is to conduct, Cambridge has always had outstanding comprehensive needs and capital plannings throughout our history. But one of the first steps for the Section 18 is to have a third-party existing conditions assessment of those buildings. If you are embarking on that, I would strongly suggest you lend your own internal capacity to whatever firm you have that you are working with. In many cases, as long-term owners, we understand our building's long-term issues better than someone coming in with check marks for that particular day. Certainly in Cambridge, we also had to provide some pushback about the cost attributed to where the failing systems were, meaning the cost to rebuild those systems. We're in a very high cost market. And we are also in Massachusetts, like Jersey, apparently, we have our own public procurement bidding that increases cost for each project as we go out. I should say that Cambridge Housing Authority, we develop all our own projects internally. We don't use an external developer. So under RAD, the financing came together as state bond funds, as the City of Cambridge's Affordable Trust, as being able to take debt on the property and converting into a low income tax credit program. This raised significant capital. We have almost $1 billion in construction at this point in time, which allowed us much deeper modernizations than you can approach with an energy performance contract, speaking to the importance of getting to your envelope and getting to your windows. Envelope leaks in our high-rise were attributed up to 40% of our energy losses. And of course, when we stop the leaking and water intrusion, we also create comfort for our residents. And we were able to, our past successes in documenting through our energy benchmarking, documenting our known savings every time we've touched a building for an energy performance, our energy retrofit. We were, with the RAD infusion, able to leverage $11 in equity from our investors for every dollar that CHA projected in energy savings. And our Energy Star scores with those buildings that we've touched, the majority of them, I'm sad to say, were below 10 on Energy Star scoring and are now in the high 90s. Next slide, please. So some of the fundamentals of positioning yourself for financing, I would really stress the accurate long-term tracking of energy savings through, we use 3 utility benchmarking programs, which I'll talk more about. You need a very deep bench within your fiscal department. The intensity of tasks you're asking for, the amount of time that these tasks now take from your department is something that you really need to plan for. And as an agency, in terms of both operations and fiscal, you're starting to pay increasing attention to the net operating income, the NOI, the bottom line of that property, and knowing where it is before you approach, and being able to accurately project a post retrofit budget, not only the utility lines, but perhaps some more admin support or other expertise you need to bring to your agency. So making sure that you're doing a good assessment of both the before and after, and you've allowed yourself some room for a measure of success going forward. So don't make those post retrofit budgets too lean on admin or other central office costs. And of course, as Stephen mentioned, the local incentives and building relationships with local agencies. We in Massachusetts are quite lucky. We're really well funded from the utility incentive program and from private nonprofits, and we're in an area that is willing to test and try new measures. Next slide, please. Here's an example of one of our energy benchmarking systems. This particular one is Rigowize, and it allows you to learn things both at the building scale and to compare your buildings on various metrics over time and how they perform. And it also provides what I find helpful is spike alerts on a monthly basis. So I can, if I haven't otherwise paid attention, I could go in and check and get messages out to managers about what's going on at their particular property. It also allowed me in the existing conditions stage to know things like which one of our buildings is more susceptible to high wind in terms of what its energy costs are. So like the different places, both locationally that buildings sit and what their construction is in terms of how vulnerable they are to weather conditions. Next slide, please. The next slide is we skipped a slide because the next slide was a snapshot of Energy Star's Portfolio Manager program. So I think it's 2 slides back. We use, there we go. We use Portfolio Manager both for the Better Building Challenge, but also our city, the city of Cambridge, has an energy disclosure ordinance where all buildings of a certain size, their energy performance is available publicly. You'll see here, for example, Manning Apartments, which I'll talk a little bit about later, was a high-rise, all concrete, all electric high-rise. Before the renovation, it was a 3, and now it's a 95 on an Energy Star score. The other 3 properties are low-rise family properties, where we did more fundamental work in terms of, in some of these cases, bringing in interior or exterior insulation to those walls, air sealing, increased ventilation, and newly efficient hydronic heating systems, often paired with a combined heat and power system. And on portfolio manager, it's whole building tracking. So annually, the utilities release the aggregate use for a building, so both the tenant meters and the common area meters. So this one most naturally shows the full building impact. Next slide, please. So I wanted to stress what you need in your accounting or fiscal departments. Perhaps maybe because I sit next to them when we're in the office, but also because I've seen the increased hurdles that they have had to go through in terms of an agency-wide as well, their change of mindset from a governmental service to business metrics. In Cambridge, we decided to hire an asset manager for the first time to bring us that overarching compliance structure. We also reconfigured our operations department to more of a district manager and then individual manager level. So there was some restructuring that wasn't forced by RAD, but which Cambridge also hadn't done in 25 years. So it was time. Fiscally, your audit cycles now may be moving from one audit in June if you're on a government year to calendar audits for each entity with monthly financials and quarterly check-ins with investors. And I know for me, there's a new urgency. And if the investor's answering an energy question, I mean, I'm all set. Our tools are built so that it's easy to answer. But it impacts everyone in the agency in a different way. And when we morphed into RAD for some properties, we outsourced the payables and billables kind of ground level accounting for those buildings so that our fiscal staff could spend their time thinking on the more important overarching issues and strategies moving forward. With RAD, your operations team is also moving to low-income tax credits recertifications, which are a different system than public housing, and you need to come up to speed on that. There are also different income limits. So we had to think about, as we approached a building, how many units we were gonna hold for our existing residents who now may be over income for the low-income tax credit program. And overall, there's a new urgency to operational standards. You want your 3-day turnover. You want property management metrics reported quickly so that you can understand and get ahead of a problem before you're in the third quarter of your year. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of, we've always used to date the Green Enterprise Green Community Certification Program as we approach a design for a particular building. That gives us an integrative whole building approach. And it brings all the trades, at least in the design phase, it brings the architect and the various sub-consultants together to make sure that the building is functioning as a whole. And we understand the integrative savings that come with doing the envelope and not just the heat plant. And we've learned that 37 to 40% of our loss, our heating losses, come from the exterior at the high-rise buildings. It also gives you, certainly me as the energy manager, a more powerful voice when we consider value engineering as we're approaching construction, to really be able to say what changes we are contemplating are most going to impact energy use and comfort for our residents. The certification program also requires that to be certified, your building has to have successfully met its goals a year out in operations. So it's very much tied to reality and operations and not just the design stage. Next slide, please. Local incentives, I'll touch on briefly, but having someone in your agency who really knows the local playing field, both for emerging pilots and ongoing incentives. CHA has 10 years ago piloted air source heat pumps. We piloted various building management systems. We piloted the first, well, it wasn't a pilot, but the first power purchase for solar energy in our area, so also assessing that potential for the PPA partnerships or offsite renewable energy purchases, which give you stable pricing and also serve to green your portfolio. Next slide, please.
Tina, you have about 1 minute left.
Okay. So the next slide, I'm hoping, shows the results at Manning Apartments, which was $66 million in construction improvements, full modernization of a 300-unit, 19-story building from the exterior all the way through to the interior of each unit. It's a 4-pipe, prior where there was no air conditioning. It's now a 4-pipe air conditioning and heating system. All the mechanicals, as we approach our buildings, we move our mechanicals to the top floor for ongoing resiliency in terms of flooding concerns. And where practical, we build cogeneration or solar arrays into the building design. Next slide. A brief touching on our on-site solar and cogeneration. Cogeneration is heavily incented by the utility in our area. We've had a great experience with it, providing ongoing cost savings. And there's also an ancillary, an alternative credit, energy credit program that pays for the annual operating for what you contract out for your cogen units. The percentage of solar, of electricity we fund from our own solar, source from our own solar, is increasing. That will, over time, that will be challenged as we are now going back and increasing our ventilation flows as a response to COVID, and increasing our filtration for indoor air quality. So we'll be using some more energy to assure that our residents are healthy over the long period of time. My last plug is for the importance of long-term energy contracts. It allows us to know 5 years out how much our energy cost is going to be, and allows us to talk back to investors if, for example, they often say they give you a 6% increase in utility cost annually, but I can show them our contracts and say, no, this is our stable base going forward. So with that, I'll wrap up to leave time for any remaining questions.
Thank you so much, Tina. So we have time for 2 questions. The first one, which I would love to also hear the answer to, is how did you go from an Energy Star rating of 3 to 97?
The whole building, right? You've got to get to your windows and exterior. And I should say we had a fundamentally low bar to start with, right? All electric construction built in the 1970s. You can do a lot with that. And our utility incentives and the cogen programs were also very, very helpful in that regard.
Great, concise answer. So the second question is, second and last, how are the costs of benchmarking and analysis tools, e.g. Rigowize, covered? Allocated to each entity or handled centrally?
Yeah, I can say over the years we've flipped. You know, there's been point in times when we've allocated them to certain buildings. There's been certain times we took it out of the COC cost center and allocated it out to buildings. And I'm pretty sure going forward with our property budgets post-RAD, there is a service line for, say, energy management that we've built into those portfolios to handle both the reporting and my time within the office working on properties.
Thank you. Before we let all, well, first of all, I want to thank our presenters for this fantastic information that you're putting out there to the world. Before we wrap up, we have one more poll question that we'd appreciate you folks who are attending to take advantage of, to take part in. Leslie, take it away.
Sure. Okay, as we did before, folks, if you could go to slido.com and again, type in the event code #DOE if you're not already there to access the poll. And you should, if you are already there, you should see the final poll on your screen. The question is, what financing strategies are you now more informed about than you were before as a result of today's webinar? Let's see, it looks like in the lead, we've got EPCs, definitely more informed about, and also what JoAnn talked about, the recoverable advance agreement in second place there. Also more informed about the RAD program in general. Let's see, Capital Fund, the Office, HUD's Office of Capital Fund Financing Program, the DDTF program, and then followed by the LIHTC program and Affordable Housing Trust Funds. That's super helpful. Thank you all for giving us that feedback.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. So many of you did ask after JoAnn spoke about the website she mentioned. There is a case study on the website about her renovation and financing of the retrofit at Manhattan Housing Authority. And here is the link to the resource she mentioned. It's a case study, and if you go through the case study, you'll see a section on tools and resources. And you can find the example of her grant agreement that she had with her city there in that case study. Then we have another case study on the Jersey City's work that you can also have a look at. Next slide, please. Great. Let's see. So we do have a great lineup of these presentations you see on your screen. Go ahead and visit the Better Buildings Solutions Center to register today. Next slide. We do hope you'll join us for the next webinar in our series called CPACE Financing Turns 10. We'll be exploring the impacts and success stories of commercial property assessed clean energy financing, better known as CPACE. Next slide. To watch recordings from the Better Buildings Virtual Summit or the 2020 Summer Webinar Series, or any technical presentation from our DOE National Labs, go ahead and visit the on-demand webinars library, where all previously recorded presentations are archived, including this one. Next slide. Great. So this is the Better Buildings Solutions Center, where you can find one of our 3,000 publicly available solutions. These are the case studies, many of our Better Buildings partner case studies, and all sorts of other tools and resources for you to explore by topic, by solution type. You can filter by many different parameters when you go to the site. You can also find our multifamily sector page where you can hover over programs and partners. And in the field, you can hover over programs and partners, and then the challenge, and then select the sector you want to look at. In our case, the multifamily sector. You can use this page to explore curated content for our sector with many different solutions, webinars, and more on our multifamily sector page. Next slide, please. Let's see. Great. With that, a big thank you again to all of you, to the wonderful panelists, JoAnn, Stephen, and Tina, and of course to all of you for joining us today. Thanks so much. And let's see, one last note, I want to encourage you to follow the Better Buildings Initiative on Twitter for all the latest news. You'll receive an email notice when the archive of this session is available on the Solutions Center. Thanks to everyone, and we are now concluded with this webinar. Thanks again.